Local businesses are also pitching in and have raised $14,000 to kickstart a safety and education awareness program with the Hawaii Bicycling League. Honolulu Mayor Peter Carlisle will be one of those participating in the ride.
With an August deadline for a budget deal to raise the nation's debt ceiling looming, President Barack Obama and congressional negotiators are looking at closing some tax loopholes and cutting popular social benefit programs. Now, at the same time, the unemployment rate rose to 9.2%. And joining us this morning is the executive director of the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization, Dr. Carl Bonham. Thanks for joining us here this morning.
Good morning.
So, just 18,000 jobs added in the latest report, according to the latest government report. This has to be shocking to analysts.
Well, it was less than what people thought, for sure. Basically, it's a lousy jobs report. The June numbers were really quite bad. We added 57,000 private sector. When you take out the loss of government jobs, state and local and federal, you get down to 18,000. And on average, we've added about 125,000 jobs per month for the first 6 months of this year.
So significantly lower than what we've been seeing in the months
we need
before.
to see 250 to 300,000, not 125,000.
Right, and that's why the unemployment rate increased to 9.2%. A lot of chatter these days about the possibility of the U.S. defaulting on its loans. Explain how that would happen and if we might see this in the coming months.
Well, basically, the debt ceiling needs to be raised so we can continue to borrow and borrow more. And essentially, what the government is doing is they're rolling over loans, right? So they're borrowing to pay off existing loans. And
kind of like a home mortgage. If you decide to take on another mortgage, you're just making it worse.
And Congress has to raise the debt ceiling in order for them to do this. And the Treasury Department has said that by August 2nd, they will essentially run out of money. And that would mean that first they would begin radically cutting government spending. They would try to continue to pay off loans and to repay their debt, because a default on their debt is a severe problem. It would raise interest rates. Really, no one knows how bad things could get if the U.S. government were to default. And the first thing that would happen would be that people wouldn't get Social Security checks, the military wouldn't get paid, and so on.
Right. Now, that's the debate that's going on in Capitol Hill right now between the Republicans and Democrats of raising that debt ceiling. Now, the debt ceiling at $14.3 trillion at this point. We've borrowed and spent before in the past. Why is there all this pressure right now to raise the debt ceiling?
Well, because we're bumping up against the debt ceiling. You have to raise it if you're going to borrow more, right? You're only allowed to borrow so much, and the $14.3 trillion. If we're going to borrow more, you need to raise the debt ceiling. And the controversy really is that you've got the two parties are essentially fighting over the conditions under which the debt ceiling could be raised. So they have to agree to raise it, but what are the conditions they're imposing? And in order to raise it, they're both trying to pass a bill that says, okay, we're going to reduce our deficit spending over the next decade. And President Obama called House and Senate leaders into the White House yesterday, and now they're talking about cutting deficit spending by $4 trillion over the next decade. And the problem is they're fighting over whether we do that the way the Republicans would like to do it, which is completely through spending cuts, or the way the Democrats are suggesting it needs to be done through a combination of spending cuts and increases in revenue.
And some of those, just to get this, we have about 10 seconds to go, but what would be maybe a possible solution to all of this? Is that to figure out what's happening in Medicaid and Medicare and taking care of that?
Well, the problem is that you cannot solve our long-term deficit problem by focusing on discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is only about 35% of the entire budget. And the current budget projections already have that going down. So you have to focus on Medicaid, Medicare. Social Security is not the problem. It's health care spending and a shortage of revenues. We have less revenues now than we did 10 years ago. And you cannot solve the long-term deficit problem without doing Medicare, Medicaid, and revenue enhancement.
Dr. Carl Bonham joining us here from UHERO. Thank you for joining us here this morning. And don't forget, you can see this interview again by heading over to the morning section of KITV.com/thismorning. Time now is 6:41. We'll be right back.